Hello, everyone. We have another re-release of an Eager to Know episode. This time it is with Josh Teixiera. And I just re-listened to this episode, and I got to tell you, this one is a gem. I don't know if I am in a different place 5 years later from recording this or what, but I am re-looking at this episode, and I think it's really fantastic. I think this is one of the best conversations that I've had on this podcast. So Josh, well done. So please, everyone, enjoy this. Josh is a former colleague, and we reconnected for this podcast, and I got to know about him in a new way. So everyone, please enjoy my conversation with Josh Teixiera.
My family never moved when I was growing up, and many of the kids I went to kindergarten with, I graduated high school with. I am one of those people that remembers everything from childhood. The conversations I had, the conversations other kids had, and all the antics everyone got into. Yes, I remember this all the way back to kindergarten. I think people are pretty well formed at a young age. Core personality attributes, inherent strengths and weaknesses. I think I was fully formed as a person at about 6th grade. What I find interesting is how these core attributes affect how we connect with the world as an adult, our relationships, how we choose to spend our free time, and the work we pursue. Josh and I worked together at a digital agency in Boston. I was in project management, which means I would be responsible for delivering what was determined to be needed for our client. Josh, on the other hand, was responsible for figuring out what needed to be done, what problem needed to be solved. I am happy to share my conversation with my former coworker, Josh Teixiera. You said that you're very comfortable in figuring out what needs to get done.
Yeah, it seems almost like an innate urge. When I was a child, before I could read, I had a bookshelf next to my bed. And my parents came in one day to discover I had pulled all the books down off the shelf and rearranged them in order of height.
Okay. How old were you?
God, I don't know. I know I was older than 2 because we were in the house we moved into when I was 2. So between 2 and 4, maybe. I don't know. Before I wouldn't alphabetize them because I wasn't able to recognize the alphabet yet. But I knew I could create a system in which they were ordered by height. And similarly, on like Christmas morning, I would never play with my toys. I would create arrangements of all the toys that I had opened. So I'd create these like elaborate setups. With my Matchbox cars, I had like a ton of Matchbox cars. That was the only way, like my parents and I had a nanny as well, that they could bribe me by going on errands by saying I'll get a Matchbox at the end or whatever. So we'd go wherever and go to Kmart and I'd get a Matchbox. But it would take me hours to pick out the right one. And then I would get home, I would dump out all my Matchbox cars. I would align them by color and then put the new Matchbox in its proper place based on the color organization system. I remember in high school, they gave us these like assignment books. I went to a Catholic school, and so they, everyone had like the same assignment book, and you're supposed to write down your homework for each period, and then you take that home and then do that work and then cross it off. It wasn't enough for me to just like refer to what I had to do and do it. I had to use a straight edge ruler to cross off with a perfect line every box so that every page, if you went back in my assignment book, would be perfectly crossed off across every day, across every assignment. And I remember I worked at the time, this is weird, I worked at the Catholic church that I went to. I worked in the rectory, like I answered the phones in the afternoon or whatever. And one of the priests there, like, he saw my assignment book and was like looking back at these weird, obsessive, meticulous cross-out lines and was like, "Are you okay?"
I'm very curious how this would affect your interaction with people. And the reason why I ask that is I mean, I'm not like a psychologist or anything, but like you're basically kind of taking control and making order out of things that you can. But when you're dealing with people, you can't. So did that cause you problems?
Totally.
It did.
Totally.
Okay.
Totally. It's caused me problems in all kinds of relationships where I can't control them, because I think what it's driven by maybe is like fear of disorder or fear of chaos. And I'm trying to assert control over whatever domain that I can. One of the most impactful meetings for me, I was working at an agency and we were building an internal platform for a big technology company. We had no business doing this work. We were scrappy, everyone with black t-shirts and beards and fixed gear bikes and stuff. We had no business, but like all of a sudden, like the CMO is of this huge global brand is like in our office, right? And so I had to do what was called like a goal setting exercise, because all of these executives had flown in, but they had never been in the same room with each other. So all I did was get them talking, and then I started to identify patterns and repetitions. And I created clusters, and I organized all the things they were saying into groups. And those groups informed the goals for the platform. And I basically said, like, okay, so we've now heard from all of you. Here's what I'm seeing emerge in terms of like what this thing needs to do, connect people, inspire people, whatever those goals were. I can't remember at the time. But by doing that organizational tactic, which I've been doing since I was an infant, I was able to get these people that are like thousands of light years above my pay grade to agree and see on the walls that they weren't all on different pages. They actually could align if we just like got everyone talking and organizing those themes into things that were actionable. And so like it's weird to see that kind of behavioral pattern that has obviously been innate.
What do you think with that brain you would have done if you say were a pilgrim and you were a farmer?
I either would have had the most meticulous, like well-oiled machine, or I would have over-organized my farm into like non-existence, where like I would only be focused on the organizational structure of everything, because that's like the downside of it is like I'll make lists of lists of lists, and none of those things get done. But because I've accounted for them in my list of lists, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool, I'm going to cover that later. But really, it's just like an activity of organizing the chaos in the brain, I think.
Yeah.
So my farm would have either been super rad and like good looking, or it would have been like completely unproductive, but like obsessively ordered.
That example you gave with the executives and all the chaos, and you were able to normalize it and make sense of it. Like, that's amazing. That's an incredible story. I think there's this concept of the things that are our uniqueness and our strength can also have a flip side. I remember I heard Mike Tyson, of all people, talking about, I think he was talking about someone, he has a history of like substance abuse, and he was talking about another celebrity. And I remember him saying that the things that make you really good in what you do are the same things that actually cause you to act in these 100%. Addictive behaviors.
I mean, it's kind of like an age-old like Jekyll and Hyde story, right? Or like Two-Face, the villain from Batman. I've seen my OCD and my brain be really, really productive and like be a like breakthrough and like help like the story with the executives and stuff like that. And then even in my creative writing and stuff like that, I've seen my ability be productive. I've also seen it be completely disruptive to everyone around me. Like there's like 1,000 half-started notebooks in my apartment.
My opinion on that, though, is even if you have 1 million notebooks in an apartment filled, as long as you keep going and you get one of those ideas moving.
Yeah, I feel you.
I think totally. That's really important. I don't think people should get hung up on ideas that don't come to fruition.
Yeah.
And as long as something is happening,
Yeah,
if you're not doing anything, that's a problem.
100%.
But I think that having those mental cycles of envisioning, flushing out, creating, trying, even failing, and then just keep going.
It took me a long time to get comfortable, like getting dirty and fucking up, making mistakes, even if I knew my idea or vision was true or something I wanted to pursue. And this could be creatively with like a song or a poem or whatever. Or it could be in a professional environment where I'm trying to like, write a huge deck to like prove the value of our solution that we're going to go design and build and put in the world, right? When I put pen to paper, I used to have this pressure that it had to like come out like fucking perfectly for some reason.
But would it normally come up? I mean, were you able to make it come up close to perfect?
Sometimes. Once in a blue moon. Do you know what I mean? Like once in a blue moon, it would just like come out, and that would be what I would hang my hat on in terms of like, that's what I should be doing all the time. And it took a long time for me to get comfortable with things being shitty. And what's funny is actually like working at IBM again, like learning to work in Agile, where like you only focus on like, the MVP. It's so corny to apply that
a small
to
piece.
Work. Yeah, it's like what's the smallest thing I can articulate well today, and then how can I build on that tomorrow? And being comfortable with all the messiness that gets to just being able to articulate that one thing.
Yeah,
it's like I think I had this like pressure on myself that I had to like just fucking like whip out genius off the bat without putting any of the toil in. That it takes to do creative work.
I think a lot of people don't do anything because of that, because of what you just described. There's a lot of people that they talk and they're able to sit back and criticize everybody else, and they're probably right. Like their criticism is accurate, but they're not doing anything. Right. And because when you're producing something, it's not always that great, and oftentimes you have to produce things that aren't that great to get something great. So let me just tell you about because I'm very similar to you. And when I started painting, that was one of the biggest lessons in that, because when you start painting, I knew I wanted to be a good painter. Yeah. And I realized the only way to do it is to paint. And I'm going to have to be painting stuff that isn't good. And it sucked. And I hated it. And I would use the concept of snowboarding, because when I first started snowboarding, it always sucks. God. But the only way to get good is to keep snowboarding. The problem with painting is it takes a really long time. Yeah. And I was also doing more representational art. So like I'm painting like a building. So it has, you can very quickly tell.
Like
I knew, and I knew the quality that I wanted, and I knew that I wasn't reaching it. Now, occasionally I would. Yeah. So that was a huge lesson for me in getting comfortable with that. And it wasn't just a lesson about art. It was a lesson about kind of life. And then in talking in this podcast, I realized like that's the key to, with a lot of people in being successful, is just being comfortable with just working hard and doing the best you can.
I agree with you. I don't want to keep tying it back to our professional experience, but I think this is important because it's a lesson that I learned like the very hard way, is that like the environments in which we worked, like agencies, their trade craft is posture and presentation. Right? It's about faking it until you make it, blah, 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 whatever you want to say. And I had a very hard time. So I got very comfortable being messy at IBM, like learning Agile, learning true design process, like learning true collaborative process, learning that things shouldn't be perfect because that would be fucking obviously wrong because we haven't tested it with anybody. Like those kinds of methodologies. When I went back to agency world, I got like really like hit in the face, like executives were like, why am I looking at this incomplete deck? I'm like, well, it's incomplete because the thoughts are incomplete. We're supposed to work on them together and build them up so that when we present them to the client, they're complete. But like what I learned was I was jumping through a bunch of internal sort of judgmental, what you're talking about, like with critics, right? Like I would have to present a pristine, perfect like deck that I didn't believe in any of the ideas. I hadn't done the due diligence to like think through it. I haven't tested it with customers. I haven't like learned anything. I'm just presenting a deck, and because it looks pretty and because I'm a good writer, I can make it sound good. They think it's great, good to go, let's go. And so that was a struggle. I'm still going through it now. Finally got comfortable with work being imperfect, whether it's creative or whether it was professional work. I got comfortable with the idea that like, this is collaborative work. Let's all make a mess together, and then we'll polish it up when it needs to be presented or reviewed or right. Now, when I went back into agency world, I realized, especially larger agency world, that's not how it works. Like if you come into a meeting with like the fucking ECD and you're the fucking experience strategist, that deck better be like polished up. Even though the thoughts in the deck have not been verified, validated, or thoughtfully investigated, as long as it looks and sounds good, fine. But if it looks imperfect, then it looks sloppy. Instead, what I realize is the sloppiness is the doing of the work.
The thing that got me excited about your story was when you started talking about being a little kid. Because that example is showing like the true Josh, like who you are. It's before you could read. And like that's how your brain works. And I find that interesting how, whether we're talking about your job or whether you're talking about your creativity, where that brings people.
My mom really encouraged any of my creative endeavors. Like as I mentioned, I was really into like drawing when I was a kid. So my mom, signed me up for classes at Museum of Fine Arts. And I would do like these summer classes when I was like, 8, 9, 10, whatever, go every week to Museum of Fine Arts, get behind the scene tours. And they really, really encouraged it. At the same time, growing up in Boston, of course, everyone is obsessed with baseball. And I happened to be good at baseball, which I think made me free from being picked on, if that makes sense. So I could be obsessed with like music and poetry and stuff, but I had enough jockiness that I could get away with it. Baseball was like a religion in my family, which like many Boston families, right? But my grandmother was like super, super tight with me. She was obsessed with the Red Sox, So I became obsessed with the Red Sox. And then, I don't know. I was good at it. I don't know. I wasn't like a huge like home run hitter, like a big dude. I was pretty small, but I had like really good eyesight. And I also somehow got like a weird bit of like creative expression from like my swing or how I'd feel the ball or like how I'd wear my uniform. I don't know. It was almost like part theater, part athletics.
I ended up playing Little League just because I knew I was the only boy, and I had all sisters, and I was the only boy. And I'm like, I know they want me to play Little League. Like, I do not want to do this, but I'm just going to,
like that.
I am going to do it. And I did it, and I never got it. Like, it never connected this. And so I'm curious what it was about it that
I don't know.
Connected
There's
with
something
you.
cultural about it that I did. I don't know. Maybe I latched onto it because of my grandmother, or just because, I don't know, it seemed like more of the church in Boston than the actual church. But then there's also, I don't know, man, like there's something beautiful about the physical mechanics of like the swing and like being able to like tee up a ball and know that you hit it square. There's something awesome that I loved about like maybe this is back to my OCD, but like when, like 90% of baseball isn't playing the game. It's like practicing, doing drills, doing batting practice. Like there's something repetitious, where you're trying to perfect like exactly how you catch the ball with two hands, the right crow hop, the way you're supposed to throw the ball mechanics wise. Again, with batting, like the way that you stand, like look at that. Remember Nomar Garciaparra?
Mm-hmm.
Like he had this incredible weird every pitch routine where he would tap both toes to get his feet into the cleats. He would open and then close his batting gloves. And he would do that like 3 or 4 times, and then he would be ready to go. There's something like insanely OCD about baseball that I think appealed to me. I remember I was on this trip to Arizona. I would go to Arizona. They would pick kids from like the North Shore every year to go to Arizona, because Arizona, obviously, you can play baseball all year. So we would go. It was like spring training for high school kids that were good at baseball. We were in Tucson, so we were staying in Phoenix to play baseball. We would have like, all day long baseball drills during February vacation. We went to Tucson to see University of Arizona play, and Pearl Jam's first album came out that day. And I knew it because I was listening obsessively to like Emerson College Radio, listening to all these weird underground bands and stuff. And right before the bus left to go back to Phoenix, which was a super long ride, I ran out of the bus and ran to I saw a record store across the street, and I bought the tape so I could listen to it on my Walkman all the way back to Phoenix. And like on the bus, like these kids were like, "Oh, what is that fucking kill your father, kill your mother music? This fucking freak, like blah, 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 blah." And meanwhile, I'm like on an elite, like athletic trip with other elite athletes, but I'm the weirdo because I bought a Pearl Jam record. You know what I mean? So it's a very big part of my life, but I was able to combine that with like still being passionate about music and writing and everything. So I think I got into poetry through like song lyrics. I think sadly, I think I started like actively writing because of like my first breakup when I was like 14 or something like that. But I had already been obsessed with like music, and I would study the lyrics, I would study the liner notes, like, and I started like exploring that. And then from there, again, going to like a private school and stuff, like we had like an awesome English department that I was able to explore and sort of start to read other poets and realize that that's actually like a school of thought and a school of creativity. And then, at Syracuse at the time, the English department was insane. Mary Carr, Stephen Dobbins. It was just like famous authors were just the professors at class.
Okay.
It was crazy.
When did you decide that you were going to minor in poetry? Because it's one thing to be writing lyrics about your first breakup. And it's another thing to even get into reading the lyrics back when there were albums that you could read them on.
No,
but it's another thing to actually be a minor in college.
Yeah, no, I know, and actually be studying with like published, active, famous like poets and authors, right? Like it was wild. I would say, maybe it first blossomed with that breakup, but I explored it throughout high school, and I had like this friend Bill Bradford from Bill Ricca, and he is the best to this day, the best writer I think I've ever. Maybe him and my other friend Billy, also named Billy. That's funny. I never thought of that. That he was also writing poetry, and he was like a fucking star hockey player. So he was a weird enigma like me, where we're kind of athletes, but also like weird, creative nerds. So I explored it throughout high school. When I got to Syracuse, I was lucky enough to be put into some like honors program, and they had this course of study called English Textual Studies that was only available to those that were in the honors program. And you could focus on an area within English textual examination that you wanted to focus on. It could be semantics, it could be debating, it could be journalism, and I was obviously drawn to poetry, so I focused on poetry and made that my minor. And then there was a poet named Michael Burkhardt. He is not well known, but he's incredible, and he kind of became like my Sherpa a little bit. Like I had him in class. He was my professor, and I would go to his office hours and stuff and show him my raw notebooks and stuff. And he actually he started Xeroxing my raw notebooks, and he like sent them to the New Yorker and the Atlantic to try to get them like published. They didn't get published. That's fine. It's for the best. But what he was enjoying was I was using an illustration notebook. So like a big heavy grade paper that like an illustrator would use, like I would use when I was a kid, like going to art class. And I was writing like deconstructed poems all over the multifold pages. So it wasn't like creating verses or anything like that. It was just like phrases and chunks of words that I would then like edit into something cohesive or cogent on like the other page. So he was more interested in like the map of madness that I was just like using an illustration book to write poems. And so that really inspired me to keep exploring it.
Those pages where it was just like chunks of stuff. Are you comfortable doing that with the OCD and everything being buttoned up? Are you okay just writing like that?
It's funny because like I'm only now, again, this is why I say this is great. This is like therapy, but like I'm only now connecting the fact that I had been comfortable doing that in other mediums, but like doing that at work was not ever comfortable for me for a long time. Like everything would have to be like perfectly crafted out the gate. But the intent of me using an illustrator's notebook, and I also to this day, I still use Micron because they felt better on the heavy grade like illustration paper.
Yeah.
God, I wish I had that notebook, man. But
I wish you did. Can you find it?
I might be able to.
Because
I actually might be able to. I'm going to look right after this call for sure. But what I'm connecting now, the dots, is that it seems like I was very comfortable in that medium. And I think what I did was I intentionally chose an illustrator's notebook and an illustrator's tool to do writing to throw off the rules. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm like, this is an illustrator's notebook. I don't know. I'm writing poetry. Look, it's a mess. Ha ha ha. You know, like to maybe like try to convince myself to be okay with the mess. My best friend at the end of college is a very successful illustrator who also, at the time, was taking a lot of acid and writing a lot of like what he thought were terrible, but I thought they were amazing poems. And just recently, during this past year, somehow, like we had lost touch and stuff, we reconnected, and we collaborated on a piece where I wrote a poem and he did a drawing, and we were in some gallery opening in London. Obviously, we couldn't travel for it, but there were 100 basically postcards of like a painting or a drawing with a poem that accompanied, and he and I were part of that. And so it was a group show. But it was a very nice culmination to our friendship and the story I'm telling about like how poetry has kind of like followed me along the way, including now being in a group exhibit with my college best friend. The notebooks I keep, I have, a bigger one, and then I keep a pocket one. The front, it's like a mullet. There's business in the front, party in the back. So if things strike me throughout the day, I use the back to just jot down, lines and thoughts and just loose, I don't know, poems. I don't know how to describe it. Like I play with phrases a lot. I play with sounds a lot. I'll play with an idea. I don't write about breakups anymore, which is great. And so as those things occur to me, which they happen naturally, I'll just jot them down to save them for later. And then I'll move them into I have a big ongoing Google Doc that is just like raw dump of notes. And then I turn it into a refined, this is sad, but I use like a slide deck metaphor. I use Google Slides and I turn it, just got like the orientation of the page better. And I'll edit my raw notes into something that I feel good enough to show like my friend or my girlfriend or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah. None of it's ready for like prime time, but I have a process. I let it bubble up naturally.
And it sounds like this poetry is something else that is like core to who you are.
Yeah.
Like it sounds like it's a very deep part. It's a very deep part of you. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's not something, again, like the fact that I don't carve out time to just like think up things, and the fact that they occur to me in such a way that I feel like I have to capture them. It feels like an instinct. It doesn't feel like something I've learned or set out to do.
Yep.
Which is both like lazy, but it's also interesting for me to explore in terms of why does that happen? Why do these phrases occur to me? Like, why do I turn a moment or like a sight into a turn of phrase? And why do I play with that?
Yeah.
And I don't quite know yet.
So Josh, it sounds like your life, I'm kind of like summarizing everything. No, but it sounds like the life that you live, or you've lived, in your career and your interests, they kind of allow you to express who who you are. So for instance, if you were born in Pittsburgh and you had to go to a steel mill, and work, 7 days a week, and you never got a day off, so you couldn't do poetry, you couldn't do music, you couldn't coordinate with all the executives, you're like working in a steel mill, you would be completely stifled. And it sounds like you are able to like be you.
You're right. Circumstance is a lot. I think about like my dad though, right? Like my dad's a floor guy, he does like carpets and rugs and tiles and shit. But at the same time, he makes like time every weekend for himself to go out to Nahant, to the beach, even in the like dead of winter, and just sit by himself, get away from my mom, get away from like doing rugs. He doesn't actively write poems or express, but he has that soul. He wrote me a poem for like my 10th birthday, I remember. Like he has that spirit. And so he definitely finds a space to connect with that part of himself, even though most of his time is spent at a fucking construction site with a bunch of idiots like putting the floor in. Do you know what I mean? And so I don't know if I've done a good job of that. I'm lucky in that, like, like in like the offices that, we've worked in, it's fun and creative and cool. And like, I have my notebook. I can spend 5 minutes, put my headphones on and like write a poem without pissing anyone off. No one knows what I'm doing. It's fine. So I have that luxury. And also I would say that like, I feel two ways about that. Is that like a lot of my career and a lot of my creativity feels in some ways to me, because it feels instinctual, it feels accidental. And that's why I feel bad about not carving out time to write. Like you're talking about your painting, right? And like you're going to paint a bunch of shit that's going to be crap, but you're going to maybe have a breakthrough and paint something that's awesome. I don't give myself the time to practice because I've always let it bubble up. And, like even when I worked, my first real job was at an investment bank doing like UX and content and stuff for the digital tools we were building for the team. Like my coworkers would catch me writing poems at my desk and stuff. So it has allowed me the ability for that stuff to bubble up. I haven't had to, isolate myself and go to Nahant by myself with a book like my dad. So I've been lucky in that way. And in some ways, you're right to say that a lot of what you know about me is really me. Like I'm definitely hard on my sleeve kind of person. So much so that it's bitten me in the ass in work environments, because like I always went in there with like too much of a goofy spirit of like, yeah, it's us versus the world and let's figure this out. And I let too much of that freak flag show a little bit. But I don't know. I guess at this point I kind of wouldn't have it any other way. So
thank you, Josh, very much. This was really, really cool talking to you in this way. Obviously, we've talked working together over the years, but this was a very unique interaction and communication.
I agree. It's been great to reconnect, and it's been really interesting exploring this with you. Hopefully, I can turn the mic around next time and find out more about what you're up to. So,
my name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.